All right, so I'm sitting here with Jennifer Fitzgerald from Policy Genius, and we're going to talk a whole bunch of things about insurance, something that I probably don't look enough into. So I'm very excited to have Jennifer join us on the show today. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Mark.
You're very welcome. So I've been looking forward to speaking with you ever since our mutual friend Daniel Galati brought you up to me. And I've been looking at Policy Genius, and I love what you guys do, and especially the language that you use to really captivate your audience. So I'm looking forward to really diving into that. Before, though, that we get into the nitty-gritty of Policy Genius, let's just get to know you a little bit more. And let's start off with, what is your 6-word memoir?
Well, Mark, I like brevity, so I went with a 3-word memoir in response to your question, and it would probably be, you did what?
Breaking the rules here, just 3 words.
Yep.
I like that, though.
Sweet.
It's very avant-garde. You have 3 empty spaces and then 3 beautiful words to fill it up. So
exactly.
All right, great. So thank you so much. And now, what is one recent great conversation that you've had over a cup of coffee or tea that you can share with us today?
So I do a weekly trivia team. So New York City has a competitive trivia league. And last week, one of the rounds was on Sesame Street. So 10 trivia questions about Sesame Street. They're pretty good questions. And so there was a lively debate as we were debating some of the questions. And it turned out it led into a great conversation after the round because, we probably have a 15-year age span on my trivia team. So people in their mid-20s to early 40s. And it was just really cool to see how something like Sesame Street really is universal. And we all had the same cultural touchstones. We were all able to debate about what New York City borough is Sesame Street set in, which was one of the questions that we got right, but it led to a lively debate. And it was just really interesting how something, as simple as that really, brought together people who were 15, 20 years apart in age and the whole bar really. So that it led to some good conversations about how, that led people to read their first book, how they learned numbers from Sesame Street. And it was just awesome to kind of see that. It's kind of trite. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about it, but just to see it in action in a bar and bringing everybody together was pretty cool.
That's great. Well, I'm curious, actually, which book did Gladwell write that in? Because I remember that a little bit.
It was in The Tipping Point,
Yep.
Where he was talking about the virality of things and how little things can be super effective, and some of the techniques Sesame Street used to teach kids the alphabet and the repetition over and over again. Has proven to be pretty effective, and it does. It sticks with you. 30 plus years later, for most of us, we still remember it. And it's just so ingrained in our brains.
That's great. I love that for 2 reasons. Number one, I like when you get a whole group of perhaps new people together, and especially if the new people that are coming together are all very educated and and so they carry this persona, I guess, in there. Then you start talking about something like Sesame Street, and it's such a great icebreaker to really level everybody and just have a great, authentic conversation. And,
absolutely.
And I love that too, because I love talking about things from childhood, right? Because it brings you back to like that childhood curiosity. And that's something too I see a lot of people bring up, especially in the entrepreneurial world, because we need to like get in touch with that that childlike wonder and curiosity to really, push through. So I know you brought up Gladwell, but what book are you currently reading?
So I'm reading on the recommendation of a friend who really got into North Korea lately. I just started Escape from Camp 14. Wow. So it's the biography of the only person who was born into one of the North Korean concentration camps and actually escaped. So it's fascinating. So this is a guy who, from the time he was born, has known nothing of like family or empathy or love, and it's just grown up in this really awful environment in this North Korean concentration camp. And he escaped as an adult, eventually made his way west. It's a fascinating story about a country that hardly anybody knows anything about.
And I mean, I love that topic. I have a weird kind of love for what's going on in North Korea because it's so beautifully ugly,
yeah.
And it's so sad.
No, it's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, and so Escape from Camp 14. What are you getting out of it so far? What's your, what are you pulling into your life from it?
Just, how important the whole nature versus nurture debate. So just really how important that is, particularly during the formative years. I mean, one of the, not to spoil, but if you read any reviews of the books, one of the kind of heart-wrenching and unbelievable moments is he turned in his mother and brother for planning in an escape. Knowing full well that they would likely be executed, and they were. And so there was just no family or love bond there. I mean, he saw his mother as a rival for food, just very, very animalistic. And just these scenes and just how, human life was reduced to, basic animal instincts for survival is just, it's mind-boggling that this is happening over there. So,
wow, that's it's incredibly mind-boggling. And how it's not ironic, it's extremely coincidental, but that we were just talking about Sesame Street and the formative years, and then here we are talking about the lack of something like Sesame Street for the formative years of this boy. Wow, I'm gonna have to check that out. Thank you so much for the recommendation, Jennifer.
Yeah, definitely, highly recommend.
All right, and let's talk a little bit about your mentors here. So who has been a major influence on you and your work, especially when it comes to creating Policy Genius?
Probably a network of folks. So before I started Policy Genius, I was a consultant at McKinsey & Company, and I was there for 5 years. And I would say a network of the senior folks that I worked with there were supportive from day one in terms of bouncing the idea off of them. I wanted to take a leave of absence to explore the idea and kick the tires on it to make it was worth me leaving. And they were completely supportive of that. In terms of helping me fundraise, making sure I had the connections in the insurance industry, all been incredibly supportive. I mean, I can't say enough about the senior partners I worked with at McKinsey and being incredibly, basically making sure that I could do this and making this all possible.
That's great. That's so nice to hear stories of an employer that really supported you. So what, how many or how long did you kick around this idea of starting up Policy Genius when you were at McKinsey before eventually launching into what it is now?
So I took a leave of absence for 6 months, as did my co-founder, who was also at McKinsey with me, to really test the hypotheses, do the market research, all the kinds of homework that I would suggest anybody who wants to start a business do, to make sure that there'd be no surprises once we quit our jobs. Of course, there are always going to be surprises, right? The unknown unknowns. Yeah. But I wanted to make sure that we had identified all the known unknowns that we could, before leaving our job, before taking the plunge. So 6 months leave of absence. Then I left, and so it's been about a year since I left, and I've been working on this full time. No strings attached to corporate America.
That's great. Good for you. So let's take one step backwards then a little bit. And where were you? What was going on that initially got you to think, hey, we need to do insurance a little bit better and I can do that?
Doesn't everybody think that at some point?
Yeah.
So I, at McKinsey, I worked in insurance and consumer financial services. So I had worked at all of the top insurance companies in the U.S. on strategy projects, growth projects, marketing projects, and saw a bit of a pattern repeating itself at all the different companies, and that they were really struggling to reach a younger digital consumer. Insurance is still very old-fashioned. A lot of it's paper-based. A lot of it relies on face-to-face or over-the-phone insurance agents really selling you an insurance product. And it doesn't look like any of the other financial services that, most Americans use today, which is mobile first, online, very much self-directed online. Mm-hmm. And just having worked at these insurance companies, I quickly came to the conclusion that change wasn't going to happen from one of them, that probably, a smaller, more nimble player was going to, shake up the industry a bit. Mm-hmm. So that's where the seeds of the idea were planted, and that's what gave rise to Policy Genius.
So now we can obviously talk for days and hours, I'm sure, about the steps you took to actually launching Policy Genius. But what was one of the major obstacles that you overcame that just kind of maybe you weren't expecting?
It's a great question. So one of the major obstacles was how to find consumers and users to validate the approach, to validate the early product that we developed. I mean, the biggest obstacle that we face uniquely is insurance customer acquisition and marketing is incredibly expensive. The most expensive ad word on Google is insurance. like by a long shot.
What's
So
what's the cost per click to get on the front page of that one? Do you know offhand?
I think it's like over $50 last time I looked.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really expensive.
Yeah, average cost per click for the word insurance is $50, I think.
Wow. So wow. So you need a $500 budget just to get 10 clicks.
Yeah.
That's insane. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one of the things we saw early on, and right away. So a very common way of acquiring customers and getting the word out there, at least for an early test of your product, was basically walled off to us. Now, we still do some Google AdWords where it makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. You don't advertise for insurance, obviously, because we'd run out of money in 3 days. But finding creative ways, like different combinations, different types of insurance, where we find that there's still an opportunity there. But it forced us to be creative about how we're going to reach people in a pretty competitive and expensive market. I mean, the reason why insurance is the most expensive word on Google AdWords is because you're competing with Geico and Progressive and Allstate, all the guys who do a lot of online car insurance quotes and advertising. They really drive up the price. So you're competing with, multi-billion-dollar companies who really want to own the market for online car insurance, at least, right? But it ends up driving up the word insurance just generally for every type of insurance.
This is really interesting. So we earlier talked about Gladwell a little bit. And in Gladwell's new book, David and Goliath, he talks about the underdog. And what I'm seeing here with what you're talking about is you're saying that the big bad boys with tons of money are able to afford all the pay-per-click advertising. And then here you are, one of the underdogs who you can't afford that, but your strength is how you could appeal to, like you said, the younger digital customer. So we weren't originally planning on talking about this, but if you don't mind, can we spend a few minutes talking about the approach you took to really engage that digital customer?
Sure. So you mentioned before the language we use on our site, for example. So we, instead of focusing top down of, here's the approach we want to take to a life insurance, we started with the clean sheet and said, how do consumers, right, between the ages of 25 and 40 think about insurance? What gets them thinking about it? What's the trigger? And then what's the journey that they take from the time they start thinking about insurance, which is not all that often, right? We're not thinking about insurance every day, maybe once or twice a year, or when there's a major life event, right? Like you move into a new apartment or you get married, things like that. So once somebody has that trigger and gets something about insurance, what's the journey that they take? When do they research? Who do they turn to for advice? How many different companies do they put into their consideration set when they're thinking about life insurance, for example? So we started, before we ever put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, just interviewing a bunch of consumers, right, to understand what that journey looks like. Where do they typically drop off? What's the friction that they encounter offline that makes them not get insurance, for example? And wanted to understand that end to end to really shape what that online experience looks like for our site anyway. So, some of the big takeaways from that is, trust in language is really important. A lot of people think that you use too much, legalese, too much insurance jargon. You're trying to pull a fast one on people. So there's a lot of distrust when it comes to insurance. So we wanted to make sure our language was very approachable, transparent, and just empowering to people at the end, that they can read it and feel like they understood what they've read. So that was a big focus for us. And the second was just a very user-friendly and approachable design aesthetic. So if you look at insurance sites, sorry, the lights just went out. If you look at insurance sites now, it's a lot of stock photos, a lot of websites that look like they were, designed in 1998 and not touched since then. And so we wanted to develop an aesthetic and a user experience that feels, like your online bank or where you go manage your investments or Mint. So that was important to us as well.
That's great. And I noticed that right away too when I went to the website. You're not stock photo, white collar corporate America kind of look, but you maybe could you talk just for a minute about how did you get to the happy medium where you were respected? Because being insurance, I'm sure you need to prove your own, right? And you need to show that you can trust them with your money and trust them with your life, right? But so how did you get to the happy medium where you were able to really tune into the digital customer, the younger digital customer, but yet still maintain that we are extremely trustworthy and we have the ethos and credibility?
Right. It's a great question. It's actually an evolving balance that we're trying to achieve, because we just launched a few weeks ago. We had a lot of testing before then to figure out, where we were succeeding at building trust and where there was an opportunity to do that better. So that's an evolving question for us, and we're still learning, where we need to fine tune it. We did a lot of testing on language. We did a lot of testing just on the quoting flows and the educational modules that we developed. So just a lot of user feedback, figuring out, why people were dropping off. Trust was an issue in some pieces, and we actually introduced elements to build that trust.
Okay.
We found that, putting the logos of the insurance companies we work with at some point in the experience actually builds trust. Like, okay, these guys work with like MetLife and insurance companies that I've heard of. That builds trust. The Better Business Bureau, it seems old fashioned, but also a major signifier of credibility and trust. And then just the easy to understand language about your privacy policy and your security, particularly at points where you're collecting personal information, also builds trust. But this is something that, we're still trying to figure out every day to make sure we have that right balance of approachability and credibility as well.
Right, right. Well, you've done a great job of it. I mean, just from checking the site just over for a little bit and signing up for it, you've definitely gained that credibility. But let's focus in on the language then. And I find this very interesting. And where I am in my life at the moment too, I just finished up writing an ebook, and in the beginning of it, I had to put a disclaimer, which I didn't like to have to put, but my lawyer told me I had to do it because I was offering advice. And I was looking at this lawyer language, and I hate it. I can't. It's so stuffy, and it's not human. But yet, no one wants to get sued, right? And that's what it's for. So I was looking through it, and I was trying to add in jokes and add in some sass and some sex appeal to the wordage, but yet keep it in a way so that if it, it could hold its own in a courtroom per se, and it would still. Could you talk for a second about your experience when you were putting your copy and just the one-liners, and then of course your longer blurbs on the website? Did you pull from the user when you were talking to them, kind of use their language, or how did you get to that happy medium?
So we subdivided the parts of the site and the parts of the user experience into, places where we had to be more traditional, like the disclosure for your ebook. For us, there's the privacy policy, the terms and conditions of use, which, unfortunately, I don't think you can escape a lot of the, legalese and things that sound very stuffy. So we've got that part compartmentalized, but everything else, where we explain how life insurance works, or we explain how renter's insurance works, that we thought was key to comprehension and where most people would be spending most of their time. We wanted to make sure that language was 100% accurate, but also, 100% approachable for folks. And we did that by testing. We had the luxury of having some pretty great writers on our team. And so, we've had some pretty lively debates in terms of, what the tone of something is. What do we think the comprehension level is of something? Is it too much content? Is it too little? We spend a lot of time on that, and I could probably guarantee you that a lot of other insurance companies don't. That's one thing where we wanted to be different and really make, our approach distinctive in this field.
That's beautiful. I love that approach. It's very human-centered. And just curious, did you at all ever come into talks about, like you mentioned, comprehension level? Did a lot of lawyers and a lot of lawyer jargon, it goes way over the head of the level of reading that I would say the layman is able to read at. Did you and your team, how did you approach that, where you needed to use the correct lawyer wordage to, prevent to be sued, but yet you were able to get them to comprehend? We try to use a lot of plain English. So if there, for example, is a term of art with respect to an insurance policy that you have to use, because that's how it's referred to in the contract. For example, in long-term disability insurance, well, I'll just take the example of long-term disability insurance.
which is important. Most young people don't have it, but they should. The name itself is terrible because people are like, oh, I'm not going to get disabled, or they think disability is like getting hit by a bus, when in fact, most of the time it's chronic illnesses that cause disabilities. We call it by that because that's what you would shop for at MetLife or Guardian. But we describe it in plain English, and we say it's called this, but it's easier to think of as income protection, because that's what it is. It's like insurance for your paycheck. So where we have to use a term, we try to come up with a plain English way to describe it where it makes sense with people.
That's great. That's so great. Let's dive into a little bit of exactly what Policy Genius is, how it could really benefit change makers and social entrepreneurs. Could we start off with sharing maybe a story of one of your first users who has benefited from Policy Genius that just you're so proud of?
Sure. Actually, one of our very, very first users came to us through Google search. She was a stay-at-home mother, middle class household, young. She and her husband were in their mid-20s, planning a family, and she had just read a book about taking a financial journey to make sure everything in your financial house is in order, from your savings to your retirement, and then one of the steps was your insurance. So she went online looking for insurance advice, came across us, and this was early days, so I'm not sure how far into the Google search results she went, but she found us. She took our insurance checkup, which we call insurance advice without the insurance agent. So it's digital but customized insurance advice about what you need, what you don't need, things that you should consider. She did it. She had a great experience, loved it. She loved the fact that it was approachable, easy to understand, but still comprehensive and personalized. She and her husband ended up getting disability insurance and life insurance through us. They didn't make a ton of money, solidly middle class. So, to have their trust to spend, a decent amount of money on insurance bought through our site was, a huge win for us. It felt great that we were able to earn their trust very early on in our journey. And it was an important step for them. They probably took a couple months, from the time they did our insurance checkup to finalizing their insurance buying process, because they really wanted to make sure they made the right decision and really think things through. They were both very detail-oriented people. The fact that we, were able to clear their very high bar felt great for us. That's and that's the kind of user that we'd love to reach and to help out.
That's great. That's such a good story, and I love how you were able to tell us that from a first user. So let's talk then about what Policy Genius offers now. Would you mind going into talking about that?
Sure. So easiest way to think of us is a digital insurance broker. So we're independent, meaning that we can sell, market, and show you quotes from a variety of insurance companies and not just one. So there are a few pieces to our experience. One is the insurance checkup, which is digital insurance advice. So you spend a few minutes answering questions about your financial situation, your family situation, and the insurance coverage you do have. And we help you identify any gaps in the insurance coverage and recommend what you need and what you don't need. From there, you can explore specific insurance product recommendations. Right now, we have life insurance, we have renter's insurance, we have pet insurance, and we're launching with long-term disability insurance in a couple weeks. We wanted to focus on the types of insurance that most people don't get from their employer, but the types of insurance that people, particularly young people, need. And that's basic life insurance, renter's insurance if they're not yet a homeowner, and disability insurance, which we mentioned. Pet insurance, we actually added because we were getting a lot of questions and feedback from the early users, like, oh, do you do this for pet insurance? And so we decided to bring that on as well.
That's because pets are like family.
What's that?
That's because pets are like family.
Particularly for the young urban crowd, for sure.
That's great. Okay, so now a lot of our listeners are social entrepreneurs, or they're thinking of taking a leap like you did when you left McKinsey. Yeah. So or just even talking of just a millennial in general, I mean, how do you find out what type of insurance you really need? And imagine if I or someone else were to go through this personalized insurance model that you have set up, why do we need those certain types of insurance, and how do you choose which ones to go with?
It's a great question. So that's exactly why we developed our insurance checkup, is to answer that question. And in terms of why insurance, because we interviewed a lot of people, and insurance is typically close to the bottom of people's financial priorities. They're more worried about their savings or setting up their retirement accounts or just sticking to a budget. Insurance tends to fall kind of near the bottom. And the way that we spin it, particularly for people thinking about making the leap into entrepreneurship, is it's part of your overall risk management strategy, right? So being an entrepreneur is very risky. It's much riskier than a typical 9-to-5 job. And so entrepreneurs specifically need to make sure that they have, insurance in place as part of a broader risk management strategy. And the educational piece that we try to achieve through our site is it's not as expensive as you think. There have been industry surveys out there that show that people think life insurance, for example, is 3 to 4 times more expensive than it actually is. And so part of that is creating, knowledge around it's not that expensive. You can do it pretty easily, and just get it done, and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
That's great. Well, you're talking to someone who believes in insurance. I mean, my father was the type of person where he would rather have, he was a minimalist, but he said you have insurance. So I was raised like that, but I can't say that's the same for everybody.
No, it's not.
So let's see if we could talk a little bit about some specific tips that you would suggest for change makers out there who want to start up their own business. And this is, you can pull together some things we've already talked about, but what would be 3 tips that we could suggest for these change makers?
Related to insurance or just generally?
Ooh. Well, I was thinking just related to insurance, but you go for it.
Well, I can do both. I can do both. So
all right, let's see. Let's go for both. Let's start off with insurance.
So for insurance, one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they buy too much health insurance. So if you're young, you only go to the doctor or the hospital in case of emergencies. You don't need the highest level health insurance plan. We, for example, in our team, we have a silver level plan, which if you're familiar with the different levels under the Affordable Care Act, is mid-level. It's a higher deductible. And you really save a lot on your monthly health insurance costs by going with a higher deductible plan. So that's tip number 1 is, buy a reasonable amount of health insurance, but not too much.
So if you had a certain budget per se that you wanted to spend on insurance, lower the amount that you put in health and maybe spread it out to the other types of insurance like long-term disability or something? Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. The other thing I would suggest is before you leave your 9-to-5 job is apply for and get disability insurance. Because disability insurance, like I mentioned before, protects your income. And replaces your part of your paycheck if you're too sick or too injured to work. That's based on your income history. So this is probably the biggest piece of advice, because I have a lot of friends who have either left McKinsey or thinking about leaving McKinsey to do, the entrepreneurial thing. I tell them before you go, get disability insurance. It's easy to do when you have a 9-to-5 job and that salary history. Get it and don't worry about it after that. So that's the other big tip that I give folks. Last but not least, life insurance. You don't need it unless you have dependents and people who it sounds weird to say, who would be financially affected by your death. So, that's kids, that's a spouse. In some cases, that's a parent who has co-signed a pretty sizable chunk of your student loans. Because student loans, particularly private student loans, may not be discharged, if you were to die and you haven't paid them off. So that's one consideration as well. Otherwise, you don't need to worry about life insurance until you have a family.
That's great. So now, you were obviously quite a change maker. I mean, what you've done with shifting, you went into one of the most difficult, archaic type of markets that there is out there, and you've really been a change maker and really shooken things up. Could you give us any tips to change makers on some things you saw when you were really trying to be different?
Yeah. Probably the biggest thing I tell people is to do your homework. Making sure when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to, make a difference in whatever field, there's going to be a lot of unknowns that you can't plan for. They're obviously unknown, but if you can do your homework as much as possible, really give yourself. I don't think you can prepare too much for the known unknowns, and just know every part of the field inside and out before you make the plunge. One, that's going to make, recruiting a team, talking to potential investors that much easier. And two, it's just going to give you the peace of mind and allow you to spend your decision-making bandwidth on things that, come out of the blue and are going to require a lot of your attention. The second piece of advice I would give to folks, if you can, find a partner you trust to work with. I think if you talk to any startup founders, entrepreneurs, it is really, really difficult, and to do it on your own is close to impossible. And if you can find a partner that you trust, whose skills complement yours, it's just that much easier. I mean, you'll find, you've probably seen this, your friends and family have a limited attention span to listen to your troubles and your worries and your anxieties.
Yep.
So to have somebody who gets it and knows what you're going through and can be a problem-solving partner with you is huge. I don't think I'd be able to do this on my own without my co-founder, and I think he'd say the same thing. It's a tough road, and so to have a partner that you can trust is huge.
That's great. And the one thing that I love too, and this is going back to kind of what you were talking about at the beginning, but you guys really spoke to the user, and you did a lot of sweat equity with ethnographic interviewing, right? Really going out and, I imagine, talking to just as many people as you can who are in your market and just finding out things about them, and probably more things than you wanted to know, but it really helped you understand who you were working with. Absolutely.
And I think that's probably a common mistake entrepreneurs and startup founders is they don't get to know their user well enough. And so they spend a lot of time designing a product or designing a service that isn't quite right, or nobody wants to use. And they're very, very far down along a path before they get feedback and before they really, I think it's called product market fit in the startup world. But just by talking to as many people as you can before you start spending that money on product or service development, it's going to save so much heartache and cash down the road.
Yeah. And then the last thing too I want to say before we wrap up here is I love how you guys have done it from the inbound kind of way, without outbound would be, for those who aren't familiar with that, would be like the PPC, Google AdWords, spending tons of money to, put literal and figurative digital billboards out there and call to attention. But what you guys have done is what I assume is inbound marketing, which is really pulling in your customers and basically doing what I've already done. After Daniel introduced me to Policy Genius, I called a couple of friends. I'm like, this is pretty awesome. You need to check this out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And they're like, oh, this is really cool. And they're like, this isn't sure. I was like, yeah. And they really help you out. So, so that's, I'm not sure if that's your marketing strategy, but it's working regardless if it was your purposeful one.
Thank you. I mean, that's certainly been our early focus is great content, a great experience, finding early adopters and people who, like yourself, which thank you very much, tell people about us. But we will, to really scale, we have to do some outbound marketing and raise our visibility out there, particularly just given how crowded this industry is. We've got limited bandwidth for that, just given, our size, the size of our team and resources at hand, but that's going to be the next part of our strategy too.
Just one quick
question. But we wanted
before...
to make sure that, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. You can finish up. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, but before we spend a lot of money in that, we wanted to make sure that the people that were using our platform that did come to us, had the greatest experience possible, that there's nothing major we need to fix before we start, spending on that outbound marketing.
Right. So the question I just wanted to ask really quick is, are you internationally based, or is it in the United States for right now?
Just the U.S. So insurance is a very regulated field. We actually have to be, licensed in the states in which we do business. So it's just a U.S. thing right now.
I imagine, though, that if someone had wanted to follow something that you're doing, but in their respected country and zones, they would be able to learn a lot from what you have done, correct?
Absolutely. So the platform's open. We've actually had a lot of folks from overseas use it, reach out to us. So that's all open. We just can't sell you insurance if you're in another country.
All right. So what is one way then that our listeners here that, they're finishing up their jog, they're going to work and they really love what you're doing and they want to help you out. What is one way that they can help you out today?
One way they can help us out is just help us spread the word. So we've, follow us on Facebook. We're on Twitter at policygenius. We found that the biggest return in terms of user acquisition is early adopters and advocates. Mm-hmm. So people who really like it, who think we're distinctive, not just in insurance, but financial services generally, just to help us get the word out there. So every little bit helps when you're starting out. So we'd really appreciate that.
All right, great. And now, where is the best place for them to go? What's the website?
The website, so policygenius.com.
Policygenius.com. And are you active on social media and Twitter?
Yep, we are. So our Twitter handle is at policygenius. I'm on Twitter, Jen L. Fitzgerald.
Okay.
And we have a Facebook page too. Just look up Policy Genius and you can see us on there. And there's, I realize people have a limited attention span and interest in insurance. So, a lot of our content on our blog and on our site isn't insurance specific, and we're biased, but we think it's pretty great. So there's enough stuff on there to engage folks. And the campaign we actually just started for pet insurance. It's called Pobamacare. So we have created a fictional world of cats and dogs taking on pet health insurance. It's a playful parody on Obamacare. So that site is pobamacare.com. And so it's just a bit of, humor and entertainment to engage folks on pet health insurance, which is important if you're a dog or a cat owner. And that leads you to our pet insurance marketplace that we've built. But my puppy is the face of Pobamacare, so you could see her on there.
Is it a pug? Is that what it is?
No. She's a mutt. I got her at an animal haven shelter here in New York City, but she's cute. So she's the face of Pobamacare on our Pobamacare website. So that's also fun. I mean, we like to have, to the extent that we can, fun in our content and our marketing, and the Pobamacare campaign is one example of that.
That's great. I'm gonna have to check that out after we hang up here. I have a cat Yoda.
Let me know what you think.
I will. I have a cat Yoda that I always talk about on the show and share some pictures. So, and he's been looking at me lately like I need to be getting him some insurance. So he's very, very healthy. I think we feed him better than we feed ourselves with all organic and local food. It's pretty funny. My mom makes fun of me for that, but yeah, insurance would definitely be the next thing to get.
Yeah.
So, Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on the Traveling Cup podcast. For all the listeners out there, for any of the sites that we mentioned as well, you'll be able to get the hyperlinks and the links and other things that she said over at thetravelingcup.com at the transcript and the show notes. So, Jennifer, thank you so very much again for coming on the Traveling Cup podcast. You have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for shaking up the insurance world and being the change maker. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for having me on here. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers.